Hey guys. Hello. Good to see you. This is always the best bit, seeing who signs in. Hey. Yay, so nice to see some familiar names. Awesome. Whilst we wait, there is a new feature on Instagram Live. So I'm going to show you some still life drawings. We're not going to be focusing on these artists today, but just to get you excited for the still life subject matter, I thought I'd just start off while everyone's signing in, showing you a few people. So this one is Mary Fedden. This is obviously quite a flat plane that she's using, but really interesting avocados and fruit there. This is Cézanne. This is a still life done by him. This one is William Brooker. And this one is Roderick O'Connor. So we're not going to be focusing on those artists today, but I thought it'd be quite fun just whilst we're waiting for people to sign in. Thought it'd be fun to show you those. The artist that we're going to be looking at today is Morandi and also Francis Hodgkins. Okay, so maybe you've heard of them, maybe you hadn't. I hadn't seen much of Francis Hodgkins' work before planning this session, so I'm really looking forward to focusing on that. Brill. Okay, let's start off. I'll tell you what I've got as my still life setup today. You might have seen some of my suggestions on my stories. I've kind of got a mixture of some of those suggestions. So I've got some pots and materials, like this. I've got a plant, Chinese money plant, that I repotted at the beginning of lockdown, and it's tripled in size. Very chuffed with that. I've got a mug, and I have kind of like a weird jewellery stand thing, which might be slightly challenging to draw, but I thought it was good to stretch myself. So we're going to start off with, as usual, our blind contour drawings, but we're going to have a slightly different focus for each of them today, just to stretch us a little bit more with that as a warm-up exercise. So the first one that you're going to do is you're going to choose one object and you're going to enlarge it really big. We did this in a class about a month ago, I think, so some of you may have done this before. But you're going to choose one object, and the goal is, in your blind contour drawing, you're going to take that object and it's going to fill the page, okay? So if any of you are new and you haven't done a blind contour before, a blind contour drawing is where you put your pencil to the paper and then for the rest of the time you do not look at your drawing. So you just keep your eyes fixed on your object. You ready? Okay, so I'm gonna choose one of the earrings, and it's going to be a minute. So put your pencil to the page, choose any of your objects. Once your pencil's down, do not look at your drawing. Okay, my pencil is down. So I try and match my hand to my eye. Just take it really slowly around my object, but I'm enlarging my object as I go. So it's a bit more challenging than normal. Means every kind of lump and bump that you go across as you draw your object, you are trying to magnify. Okay, you've got 20 seconds left. 20 seconds. Sorry, 10 seconds. That'd be amazing if time stood still. Okay, 3 seconds and stop. Okay, so the first one, the minute blind contours, are always pretty simple. This is it's like a shell earring that I'm drawing, this earring. And I tried to enlarge it to fill my page. Didn't quite meet the challenge, didn't manage to use all the space, but did enlarge it to some degree. Okay, The second one that you're going to do is going to be 2 minutes. And this time I want you to try and draw things really, really small. So I don't mind if you pick a few objects or if you just pick the same object, but this time instead of enlarging it, you're going to actually shrink it. So I would suggest using the same piece of paper because you don't need to use up loads of paper if these are just warm up drawings. So you're going to have 2 minutes for this one. You're making your drawing smaller and you can pick one object or more than one object. Off you go. So I'm going to pick the other earring, the matching earring that's right beside it. It's the same principle that my eye is slowly moving around the object. But instead of trying to match it exactly, I'm trying to shrink it. Okay, so every detail will be even more delicate. You've had 30 seconds, you've still got a minute and a half. Now this will be really challenging because you've just enlarged your object. Making it smaller is really hard. Often they turn out roughly the life size, but really try and make it smaller than your actual object. You've got a minute left, so if you've finished your object, move on to the object it's right next to and just continue going. "45 seconds left. Got 30 seconds left. "25 seconds left. 15 seconds left. So you're trying to keep all those details so small. Don't rush it, don't enlarge it, you're keeping everything really small. And stop. Okay, this was my one. So I've got my first blind contour was 1 minute enlarging the earring. The second one was 2 minutes trying to make it smaller, but actually, like I said, it's roughly about the size of the earring. It's really hard. Once you've done an exercise in enlarging, you might find that you found it really hard to make it really, really small. But you should notice that you've got a lot more intricate details. So where you've had to create space between each of your details in your enlarged one, when you shrink it, those details will be much closer together. Okay. This next one is going to be our last one. It's going to be 3 minutes, and this time you're trying to go from corner to corner. So I want you to just have a quick look at your still life setup, and I want you, if you want to use kind of a window with your fingers to match the format of your page, you could hold up your fingers like this and just try and think about how you are going to fill your page with your objects. So think about where will you start on your objects and where are you heading to, and you're going to try and work from corner to corner with your blind contour. So I'm going to start in the top left of my page. I'm going to start with my pot of paintbrushes. I'll work my way down my pot of paintbrushes and then I'm going to go across to the jewellery stand, okay, and hopefully that will take me from corner to corner. You have 3 minutes this time. Really challenge yourself not to look. As these warm-up activities get longer, it does get more tempting, but keep your pencil on the page. Try not to lift it. Try not to look at your drawing. Okay, 3 minutes, off you go. This time you should be trying to draw it roughly life size. If your still life is a tiny still life, you might need to enlarge it a bit, but it should roughly fill your page if you can make that happen. Now I can see that we've got a few new people joining today. Welcome. So good to see that we have new names. These warm-up activities, blind contour drawings, are essentially aimed at just relaxing us into the class, at getting us to really emphasise the act of looking and not depending upon what we think we see, but really, really actually looking. They're also helpful in just getting us to become more familiar with the objects that we're drawing. So often a blind contour will actually get you noticing proportions or details about your object that you might not have noticed had you not looked this much. And when I was taught this at school, they encouraged us to think about an ant walking across the surface of our object and imagining that our hand and the ant were in sync, almost like the brain of the ant was the brain of your hand. And those two things are completely matching up. Okay, remember, it doesn't matter the journey you go on to get to the other corner of your page, but you are trying to go from one corner to the other corner of your page. So you may have to jump around your objects a bit. You might even have to pretend your objects are in slightly different places, but that's okay. Okay, 1 minute left. Hey Max, good to see you there. Hey guys, hey Rosie. So nice seeing so many familiar names. Okay, we're just doing on the last warm-up drawing. There's 30 seconds left. Then I'm going to intro the next activity. So if you're just joining, I would suggest making sure your pencils are sharp and you are ready to jump into our first artist kind of inspiration activities. Okay, 20 seconds left. This was a blind contour drawing going from corner to corner of our page. So we're trying to really spread out. Hey Haz. 5 seconds left. And stop. Fantastic. Okay, I layered all my drawings on top of each other, so there's a little bit of a jumble. But I started with my paintbrushes up here, and I tried to work myself across my page to get to my other corner. So there's a bit of a journey. It kind of went down one side and then I moved my way across. Okay. But I tried to go from corner to corner. So hopefully you had that same experience. It's an interesting journey when you're going diagonally across. We're not used to moving our eye in that way, but it's an interesting one. Okay, like I said, some of you who joined very early on, there's a very cool new feature with Instagram stories. So we're looking at Morandi today, and we are going to begin by looking at this drawing of Morandi's. So he was an artist that was very, very interested in still life setups. I saw a photo of his studio space recently, and essentially his home was his studio, and he just had so many objects, so many vases, and jugs that he would draw, all very similar, and he just placed them side by side. You might have seen his work before. We'll be looking at a few of his today, and we're going to look at some of the techniques that he used. So this is a linear drawing. As you'll see here, he's got his outlines of his objects that are side by side, and then he's used these diagonal lines, really quite quick markings to indicate shadows on his drawing. So we're going to have 3 minutes. We're going to look at 3 techniques that Morandi used. First of all, we're going to look at this linear technique. Then we're going to look at cross-hatching. Then we're going to look at smudging. Okay, so those are the 3 techniques we'll look at, and each one of them we will use more time for each of them. So if you're finding these short activities frustrating, don't worry, because the time will get longer each time. So the first one is going to be a linear drawing with any shadows done in these diagonal lines. You'll have 3 minutes for it. Just take a moment to take in your still life setup. If you see Morandi's, his were actually like layered in front of each other. He doesn't have these big gaps in this setup between them. So if you want to move yours so that they are very close together, I would do that, okay? So I would suggest starting with your outline of your objects first. You can look this time, it doesn't have to be a blind contour, and then adding in your shadows. Okay, I'll keep the Morandi piece up, but I'll just make it a little bit smaller like that in the corner. So actually, maybe it's more helpful being big. I'll keep me small. Okay, 3 minutes. Off you go. Now, just because you're allowed to look at your drawing this time, don't get complacent about looking. Try and really shift that ratio of how much you're looking at your objects and how much you're looking at your drawing. Shift it so that you are really reliant on looking. And you're just simply skimming your eyes back to your drawing, and then they jump back to the object. Now, I think out of all the classes I've done, I think this class has been probably the most free in terms of the materials required. So I'm imagining that the drawings we get out of this, because you've all chosen your still life setups, will actually be quite different to each other, which is really exciting. When we did a still life setup early on in lockdown, I was a little bit more prescriptive about the types of objects you should have. And we also did 1 week looking at drawing fruit. But I tried to give lots of ideas for this week so that we had a little bit more variety and you could pick things that really interest you. Okay, you're halfway through with your time. So I would suggest, if you're still doing the linear outlines, that you just spend a little bit longer doing linear outlines and then you try and add in those diagonal lines to suggest shading. Okay, 30 seconds left. So definitely move on to shading if you haven't already. Don't worry if this isn't feeling like your best drawing. Mine is definitely pretty simple. I'm just trying to really take note of the way Morandi's working and trying to emulate that. Okay, last 5 seconds and stop. Okay, so mine was a little bit interesting, not quite as sensitive in the way that I laid down my marks as Morandi, but you can see that I indicated a little bit of the shadows by using those diagonal lines. Okay. Let's look at another of his ones. So this one is another of Morandi's works, and this he really focused on the skill of cross-hatching. So whereas in this one there were slightly sketchier lines that he used, in this one he's got really quite clear white objects, and they're not a sketch outline, they're quite distinctive in their presence as just a white blank space. And then he's used cross-hatching to indicate objects behind those objects in the front. So if you're able to move where your objects are, I'd suggest trying to have a few objects at the front and a few behind. It may just mean moving them like a few centimetres forward and a few centimetres back. Not much. But that will help you really pinpoint the spaces between your objects, which you're going to do with this dark cross-hatching. Okay. So cross-hatching is quite simply a technique of drawing lines in one direction and then lines in the opposite direction. okay, so that they meet in these tiny little X's all the way across your page. Whereas this one was just linear, going in one direction, cross-hatching, they intersect. Okay, you're going to have 5 minutes for this drawing. So I would suggest, if you're a little bit lost of where to start, I would suggest thinking of 2 realms of outlines. So imagine that first of all, you're trying to capture the outlines of the objects on the front row, and then you try to do the outline of the objects on the row behind. Okay, once you've done your 2 outlines of those 2 different groups of objects, you can then try to add cross-hatching shading to the back ones. Okay, remember these are just kind of us exploring different techniques, so if you feel a little bit lost at how to do it, don't stress, because you don't have to incorporate all of these into your final drawing. I just want you to try. Okay, for those of you that are confident, you can start now, 5 minutes. For those of you that are still a little bit like not sure about this cross-hatching technique, I would suggest on the corner of your page, just practice doing this technique of cross-hatching, okay? So I'm literally just getting my pencil and I'm working in these 2 directions. You can be really careful about it, or you can be much quicker, like this, okay? So you can build up these kind of patches of crosshatch shapes. So if you've never done cross-hatching before, why don't you just practice on the corner of your page, and then instead of trying to fill your page with your objects, keep it much smaller, okay? So I'm just doing the outlines of the objects on the front row. And I'm not including any details because Morandi's drawing, he doesn't have any details on those objects on the front row. He's simply got these outlines. So that's what I've got as my front row. I've just done really simple outlines of my objects. Now I'm going to work on the row behind. Now remember, this is just about exploring a technique. So if you're taking ages on your outlines, you won't be able to move on to cross-hatching. So try in the next kind of 5 seconds, 5-10 seconds, to now stop where you're at, wherever you're at, and now you're going to add some cross-hatching. Okay, so you could just choose one object in your background and start trying to add cross-hatching to it. Looking at the Morandis, it's not particularly neat. He's just literally tried to fill that space with cross-hatching. So I want you to try to do the same. If you find it hard to go to the edge, you can always just do it quite quite loosely and then use your rubber to really sharpen those white objects in the front. Okay, 30 seconds left, not long. Don't worry if you're nowhere near to be finished. You just want to make sure that you've at least got one section of cross-hatching as kind of experimentation that you can refer back to. Because you might want to incorporate this style into a future drawing. Okay, and stop. I know that probably rushed by. I didn't get it even nearly done, but I started to indicate the objects in the front, leaving them white, and then try to add cross-hatching to the shapes behind. But I know, because I'm doing it at the same time as you, I know that I'm giving us very limited amounts of time. But that's because I'm trying to give you almost like a toolkit of techniques that when we start our kind of final drawing, we can actually incorporate those techniques. So the last technique I'm going to look at, so we've done linear, simple linear still life drawings, we've looked at cross-hatching, and now we're going to look at the technique of smudging. So I absolutely love this drawing. He's used a much softer pencil. So if you've got a selection of pencils, you'll want to pick one that's much softer, for example, like a 6B, a 4B. If you've just got your normal HB pencil, that's fine. If you place your pencil on the page, you want to place your pencil down and put a ground down like we did a few weeks ago. I'll show you how I'm doing it. So I've had some tripod problems today, so if this snaps, we're going to be a little bit stuck. So I'm just putting this ground down like this, and then I use my finger to just smudge it, okay? So you might have done lots of smudging in the past, but often it's something that I've found a lot of people were told at school that it's not a good technique, but there are a lot of great artists that use smudging in their work, so I think it's great for us to try it and not to feel like it's a bad way of shading, okay? So just take a moment to try and get down a smudgy grey background, okay? So I'm imagining it'll look very scrappy. Don't worry if it's not feeling super neat. The idea is just to get this grey background down, okay? You tell, what, Amory, you tell them not to smudge. I was told not to smudge at school. But look, Morandi does it, so it's great. There must be some goodness in smudging. Okay, have a look at this Morandi one when you're ready to. What you will see that is quite what's quite different to this cross-hatching one is that it's almost less neat. Like this one, it could be an etching, it could be a drawing. The lines are so precise and neat, whereas this one, they're much softer, the outlines, a little bit sketchier, a little bit wider, the outlines. And the differences in tone are a lot more subtle. So a long time ago, if you joined the class, the time that I'm referring to, you'll know what I'm talking about, but otherwise I'll just give you a demo. A while ago, we tried doing these boxes where we indicated different tones. So we practiced doing a really dark tone, then a less dark tone, a middle tone, all the way to light, to a white tone, okay? And what you'll notice with this one is that it's like he has used the darkest possible tone, a mid-tone, and he's used the lightest possible tone. Whereas in this Morandi, he hasn't used the darkest one. He's limited himself to the next kind of tone. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So instead of using really dark contrast between the light and the dark, you're not going to get quite as dark as this example. Okay? So that's what we're thinking about as we look at this Morandi. So with smudging, how you get those highlights is you'll use your rubber and you'll just rub into your smudged background to bring some objects out as a highlight. So I'm going to choose one object in the front of mine, and using my rubber, I'm going to try and pull it out. So before I set my timer, I'll just give you an example of this. So I'm going to pick my kind of vase shape. It doesn't have to be super neat. You're just trying to pick out the highlights. So you'll see here, it's very loose and scrappy, but I've started to pull out of that shaded background, tried to pull some of the highlights of the object. So if you start with your rubber, squint your eyes and look at your objects. And when you squint them, you'll be able to see the darkest parts and the lightest parts. That makes the tonal differences really obvious. So we're about to start our 5 minutes. I suggest you first of all look for the highlights. So using your rubber, before you do any outlines, just try and pick out those highlights, like the Morandi, okay? You're just going to try and pick out those white parts. Then you can start to add in outlines and shading. Okay, I'm starting the 5-minute timer. I'm squinting my eyes, and with my rubber, I'm starting to pick out those shapes. Now remember, Morandi didn't have lots of white patches. He just selectively picked a few moments, okay? Once you've finished that, I would then suggest that you start to bring in some of the outlines of your objects. So you can always go back and smudge again. You're not limited to just the first beginning bit for smudging. You can go back and smudge again. If you find that at home you're struggling to know what to draw, I would suggest just Googling Morandi as an artist, because his whole life was pretty much, from most of the work that he's famous for, was about still life work. So we can often feel like that's such boring subject matter, but if you look at his work, you'll see that he's really beautifully captured it, and something really romantic, I think, about the way that he captures these ordinary objects. And he might be an interesting artist to inspire you if you are, if you're stuck at home, not able to look at things that you normally would draw from. For example, I love drawing from nature, and particularly things like the palm houses at Kew. But even though Kew Gardens has opened up, the palm houses have not opened up. And so I've been more limited than usual in what I can draw. And so looking at artists like Morandi has actually been really inspiring to think, okay, even if I'm only able to draw at home, I'm not able to go to the places like galleries aren't open, I can still actually use objects at home that I wouldn't normally and create some really beautiful drawings. Probably not quite in the same realm as Morandi, but you never know, with practice I might get there. Okay, so this is where I've got to so far. Trying to keep it quite simple, like the Morandi. I'm not adding too many details in there, keeping some of the tonal differences quite subtle. I'm not adding really dark shadows. My shadows are kind of a mid-tone shadow, okay? You've got 1.5 minutes left. I would particularly think about shadows under objects, even if they're just really light shadows. It helps to ground your objects on the page and not make it look like it's floating. Okay, last minute. Thirty seconds left. Okay, and stop. Well done. I have challenged you with just giving you such short amounts of time to practice new techniques. But hopefully that's keeping you from being too precious and you're jumping into it. So that was my example of that technique used by Morandi. Okay, we are on to our final piece. So I'm going to give you a good chunk of time for this. But I'm going to set you up well by just thinking about composition. So the artist that we're looking at is Frances Hodgkins. And this is the example of her work. Okay. So looking at this, you may love this style, you may hate this style, you may be kind of apathetic about it. The reason I've chosen this style, many different reasons. One, I was quite aware that I often show male artists and there are a lot of amazing female artists out there. So I wanted to make sure that I'm including a range of different artists. Also, this artist, Frances, she uses techniques that are similar to the Morandi. So for example, you will see there some linear outlines. You will also see smudging. You'll also see that she's used mid-tonal ranges. She hasn't got really dark shadows there, okay? I'm having a bit of a moment of suddenly wondering whether Frances is actually a boy's name as well. I don't actually know if it is a woman. I just saw the name Frances and was like, yes, a female artist. So I'm going to check that out and let you know because I could be lying. So that's why we're going to seek this as inspiration, okay? So you don't have to incorporate all the techniques of smudging, cross-hatching and linear, but I would suggest trying to weave in new techniques that you don't normally use so that you are really stretching yourself today, okay? Now before we begin, I just want you to have a look at your objects and try to think a little bit more intentionally about where you want your objects spaced. Don't just think you have to draw it as you see it. I want you to curate that space a little bit more, okay? So this piece by Frances, the objects are spaced out and the viewpoint is from above a bit, whereas the Morandi was almost, you're viewing it from very flat away. Thank you, fantastic. So a little bit further away. So think about whether you're going to space your objects out, whether you want them really close together. You make an intentional choice, okay? Now, on the side of your page, I want you to draw 3 boxes, like this. And you are just going to make some really quick suggestions of how you're going to compose your drawing. Okay, so for example, first of all, I'm going to imagine that I'm filling my page. So I've got my mug going off to the side. I've got my vase at the front, kind of falling off the page. I've got my next vase beside it. And then the jewellery stand behind that. Okay, so I'm suggesting that as like a composition plan. I'm not adding lots of details, I'm just giving a rough indication of where things go. Now I'm going to imagine that I'm drawing everything much smaller and I'm leaving a lot of space at the bottom of the page. So it doesn't matter what you decide, but I just want you to try and do 3 tiny little sketches that are almost like different ideas for different compositions you could do, okay? If you see mine, I'm being really quick about it. So my first one, I drew them really big. My second one, I've made them much smaller. And for my third one, I might decide to move all the objects down so there's a lot of space above them. So now I'm starting with the top of the objects. Okay, for example, those are my examples of 3 different suggestions of compositions that I could use, okay? So just do 3 really quick sketches. They don't need to take long, just try and make them all different. So it's like just a playful way to plan the drawing that you're about to do. When you feel confident with the composition ideas, I want you to choose one as your plan, and then you can launch straight in. Okay, so I'll leave that up to you when you begin, but we've got roughly 15 minutes to work on this one. So don't take forever planning out the composition, but I do want you to take a bit of time so you feel happy with your choice. Okay, I am actually going to pick the small middle one. Yeah, I'm going to pick this one. So I've got some space under and some space above. And I'm going to use this side of my page, so I'm not going to draw anything on this side. I'm going to use this side and using this composition idea. Okay. Off you go. If you're ready, begin. So I'll make the Francis one a little bit bigger. So it may be that you want to start with a smudged background. There's no right or wrong here. We're just trying to incorporate some of these new techniques. So I'm starting with my outlines, but I'm then going to quite quickly use my finger, which is already looking a little bit grey, and start smudging a bit so that I create a bit of a mid-tone that I can then pull shadows out of. If you look in the Francis drawing, you'll see that you can actually see kind of like, it looks like it's a picnic table. So you can also see the view outside. You can see trees in the background. You can see a little house. So if you are currently situated by a window and you want to also incorporate the outside world into your drawing, you can do that. Just pay attention to the quite quick, relaxed feel to her drawing. Don't feel like it needs to be too neat and precious. You want to add as much information as you can to be as similar to her as possible. Now, for those of you that have jumped into this and it's looking pretty similar to how you normally draw, I just want you to remember the idea of these classes is that you're trying out new techniques, that you're taking yourself out of your comfort zone to hopefully give you more like artistic language for your own work. So that's one of the goals of these sessions, is not that you maybe make your best work, but that you're adventurous with the work you do make. So if it scares you a bit, it's probably a good thing. It probably means that you are challenging yourself. Just looking through and seeing if I've got any questions that I've missed. Max, what would I do without you making sure my facts are correct? I really appreciate that. Okay, I'm hoping you are all well into drawing right now. If you're still on your composition plans, you should stop now and make sure you are getting stuck into your drawing, because otherwise you won't have much time. We've got under 10 minutes left. You'll probably want to continue on this a little bit after the class ends, but if you like giving yourself the challenge of finishing it in the time we have, then you have, just under 10 minutes left. Just take a moment, have a look back at the Francis drawing, and I'll show you. This is another example of Morandi's. Again, some more cross-hatching. It's a little bit more subtle than this one. This is Morandi's linear one. And this is Morandi's smudged one. So those are some of the techniques that you might want to incorporate as you do this still life drawing. I'll just keep it up in the corner there for us. If you're able to see the edge of your table, you might want to include that as well, so that again it feels like your objects are sitting and they're not just floating in midair. You want to give an indication of where they're located in space. Okay, just over 5 minutes left. Time is speeding past. My pencils look like a cup of fries in McDonald's. Okay, whilst you continue with your drawings, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the plan for the next few weeks with Barely Drawing. So I've had, a few of you saw that I took a poll for requests for drawings that, like subject matter that people wanted to see in upcoming classes. And I had a lot of requests for botanical stuff, so drawing plant life essentially. And I also had some requests for thinking about materials, wet materials, so ink and watercolour. So next week, we're going to begin a 2-week series on botanical life. And the first week will be just studying tonally, so thinking about drawing in black and white. And the next week we'll be looking at drawing botanical subject matter in colour. I want to give people a good heads up about this so that if they want to invest in some Indian ink or some watercolours, they can. But you can also do both of the classes just with the materials you have at home. You can do both of them with just a graphite pencil. But if you want to invest and really try to stretch yourself with wet medium, which is just what we call medium that we add water to, you could do that as well. If you don't have any plants at home, you might want to pick up some wildflowers on a walk, or even splash out on a bouquet for the class so that you've got some natural plants or flowers to draw from. Okay, just under 3 minutes left. If you haven't used your rubber yet to pick out any highlights, I'd suggest pick it up now, give it a go. Try and pull out some of the whitest spaces in your composition. If you're really embracing the styles that we've looked at today, your drawing is probably a bit scruffier than normal if you draw quite neatly. I often find when I'm imitating Morandi, everything looks a bit scrappier, but it's actually really nice having quite a loose, soft, smudgy drawing for once. Before the end of the class, if you are happy writing what your favourite technique was, I'd love to get some feedback about whether you love the cross-hatching, the linear or the smudgy technique today. What was your favourite? And maybe were any of those techniques new to you? Or have you looked at them before? For me, I've only really used cross-hatching when I've done etchings. I don't use it much in I teach it a little bit in my classes, but in my own work, I very rarely do cross-hatching. So it's always an interesting one for me to try and incorporate. Okay, we're just coming into the final bit now. So take a moment to really try and make your drawing feel complete, even if it feels like you haven't got nearly as much done as you were hoping for. Remember, those Morandi drawings are actually, they're really quite simple. He hasn't got lots of detail. There's a lot of space in them. So don't feel like your page needs to be absolutely crammed full. Even though the Francis Hodgkins drawing is very full, the Morandis aren't very full. So it can be much, much simpler. Okay. Just about to finish, so the last 45 seconds. Awesome. I'll show you where I got to, and you can just finish off where you've got to as well. Just try and complete the last bit you're working on. So this is where I got to. I ended up shifting it a little bit. This was my composition plan, but I actually found I started on the left with this mug, and as I was working across, I did everything a little bit too big to fit it all on one page. And also the format of this plan was landscape, so it was going to be tricky unless I'd drawn a box to actually do that really easily. So some of the things, I'll just walk you through how I would critique my own work. I often try and think of what do I love about the piece that I just did, and try and think first of all about positive things about your own work instead of just jumping to what didn't work well. Start by thinking what did work well in what I just did, and then think about some of the negatives. So for example, for me, what did work well? I really love some of these smudging parts here. I think it added quite a softness, almost like a warm evening light to my drawings. Particularly around here, I like the way that the smudging goes over the outline of the leaf, and some of those leaves are much more obvious, some much more subtle. What I don't love about my drawing is I feel like the composition, I actually planned for it all to fit in. So I would have preferred it if everything had been drawn a bit smaller so I could fit it all in. Okay? So with your own work, think about what just went really well. What were you brave with that you hadn't done before? And what would you try and improve next time? If you're happy sending them to me, I'd love to see your work. Always really enjoy reposting them and having other people get to see them as well, because that's the highlight of doing classes in the flesh. And if you've enjoyed the class and you're happy giving, I'll put my bank details, PayPal details up. Please do consider giving if you've enjoyed it, but the classes are free for anyone, so there's never any pressure. Yeah, that's it today. Thank you so much for joining, guys. We've just got about 45 seconds before they kick me off, so if you can tell me what you enjoyed or didn't enjoy about your work, I'd love to see some of your responses there. So Anne-Marie, you felt you were much looser in your marks and you enjoyed the mixing of the smudging and the cross-hatching. Awesome. I didn't do any cross-hatching in my final one. Should it have considered a little more how it fits on the page? Yeah, very similar to me. Even though I planned my composition, I didn't get it all in. Anyone else? It's just about to kick us off. Oh, I love you guys too. So glad you enjoyed smudging. Bye everyone.